Welcome to Adoption Utah. Here we share stories and practical advice from those who understand adoption in Utah. I'm Donna Pope, your host. Welcome to Adoption Utah. We're excited to have you here, and we're especially excited to have Lon Litchfield with us here today. Let me tell you a little bit about Lon. Besides the fact that he's my very, very good friend, he's a seasoned adoption attorney with decades of experience supporting families through the legal adoption process. Over the years of his career, Lon has handled more than 1,000 adoption finalizations. Lon, I think it's more than that, don't you?
Well, I don't know. I never have kept track. I think up to 1,100 now, but I'm just guessing.
Yeah, well, a lot. And he guides birth parents, he guides adoptive families and adoptees in this most meaningful decision of their lives. His professional work has been deeply personal. Lon's own father was adopted nearly how many years ago?
1932.
Wow. Wow. And so Lon has a unique generational perspective on adoption's lifelong impact. I'm anxious to hear about that, Lon, because honestly, I didn't even know about that your father had been adopted. So he's a second generation adoption connection through his father. He's an advocate for ethical, compassionate, and legally sound adoption practices. And of course, he's done many, many adoptions. So, Lon, tell us, I know that you got started not in adoption. Tell us just a little bit about how you got into law and then what led you from law into particularly adoption law.
My undergraduate was, I started out in a mechanical engineering degree, and I got about halfway through that, and I was working for a mining company as an environmental chemist. And in that role, I washed a whole lot of dishes. And the other thing that I did is there was a big project where there were some allegations that there had been some pollution in a riverbed, and I worked on that and did a lot of good science. And in the end, some lawyers got in a room and hammered out an agreement. And I, as a scientist on it, I wasn't that happy with the agreement. I was like, why did you give them so much? And I was like, they don't understand the science of this. And I said, it's really good to have some lawyer. We need to have lawyers with science backgrounds. And so I said, I'm going to do this. So I switched over from mechanical engineering to geography, which was the best. And then with a plan to go to law school, started out looking at in law school. I was looking at I wanted to do environmental, but I also was interested in international law, probably geography degree, but also my dad was an immigrant. And I grew up with, in a household that things were international. It's just the way the world was. Um, and after law school, I graduated around the time of the dot-com bust. And then I went to London School of Economics and got another law degree in international business law. Came back and to the U.S. and became a member of the patent bar, but I never have done any work in patents. And then started working for a small boutique law firm, small firm, but handled sophisticated litigation cases that were, and the strategies and style that I was taught was just intense attention to detail, going back and back and back to the basics and figuring out why we should win. Oh, well, if that law doesn't, we don't win under that law. What law do we win under? And then you got to figure out why it's obvious that it's the second law that applies, not the first, that kind of thing. Really, really detailed. And in that, with that firm, I handled all kinds of cases, antitrust, fraud, just brain injury, all kinds of things. Then I left that firm. One of the lawyers I was working with there left, and then a year or so later, I went and worked with him, and he had adopted 4 children, and that was part of his practice. And so he said, okay, now you need to start doing these adoption cases. And, or one of our first adoption cases um, was a contested adoption case. Um, and and from there, just started doing more uncontested ones, but also more contested. I think I've done about 3 dozen contested adoption cases over my career. And
For people who may not know exactly what you mean by contested adoption, please explain.
so most adoptions, you just get the consents and everything, and check all the boxes and go to court, and the court says, okay, we're ready to finalize. But every once in a while, somebody will come in and say this adoption couldn't happen. Most common person to do that is the biological father. But we have had cases where the mother says my consent's not valid or something. And we've had a few cases where a grandparent or other relative has come in and challenged and said we have independent rights.
That becomes problematic, or do they usually win?
Yeah, I've lost very few of those. Some of them I've won very quickly because it's really obvious, and some of them have taken a while. The ones that we have lost have tended to be ones that somebody gave up on and said it's just not worth the working at it. And maybe we would have lost those in the end anyway. I don't know. But that tends to be the pattern. Most cases we have things pretty well in order before we start. Um, Birth mother cases, I'm not aware of birth mother in Utah who's been allowed to set aside her consent. The law gives a way that you can, but I've never seen anybody do that.
Right, right. So I know you well enough to know that you really don't like the contested adoptions very much. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, I don't like them very much. No, I
And
mean
that's the
the
bottom
thing.
line.
I don't like dealing with them. They're very, very high stress. And they tend to go on for a long time. So that's a long time with high stress isn't that pleasant. However, it's just a part of the landscape. Sometimes they become contested, and you have to be ready to deal with that uh, when they do. And yeah, you don't know. Once in a while, you'll see one and you'll go, oh, there might be a problem here. We better be prepared. But a lot of the times that you have no idea that this particular one is going to be a problem until it becomes a problem. And so you have to be prepared. It's part of the landscape. Don't don't like them. Very stressful.
So when we look at an adoption, it really involves four parties. The first and foremost party, of course, is the child. The second party is the birth mother, the mother of that child. The third party is the adoptive family that wants to adopt that child. But there's also the birth father who may or may not be involved in the adoption. And along with the birth father could be other biological people in it. So you would like to say they all get together and they all say, "Yeah, let's do this and let's do this together." Um, how do you balance the interest, and what are the different interests of these parties, and how do you balance them?
So how do I balance them personally?
Oh, well, say both.
Okay, well, I mean, in the law, the statute itself, in any state, the statute itself attempts to balance those interests. And um, on the one hand, you've got a birth mother who decides she wants to place a child for adoption. On the other hand, and so then for the last since the '80s, the big question across the country has been, well, when does the father get to have input? Um, at what point does that happen? And you know, a married father is treated basically the same as the mother. In certainly in Utah law and all the states that I've been exposed to, it's been like that. But unmarried biological father, the way the law looks at it is it says, well, not you don't he doesn't automatically have get to have a say in it. And so, and the state can set up a system for determining when a father is involved and his consent is required. And as long as that the state system is, thorough and is going to get pretty much all the fathers, then it's going to be constitutional, and it's not going to deprive him of his right to a relationship with that child. Practical matters, what I've seen is in a lot of cases, the father won't necessarily say yes, but he also won't do anything to say no. He won't do anything either way. Um, and that I would say maybe 80% of the adoption situations I see are like that. Um, and I mean, it's a tiny fraction of fathers that will actually do anything. And that the way I see it is that's usually why the mother has decided that adoption is the best option, is because the father isn't. She knows the father's not going to do anything to help out.
I know I know you've recently finished a case, let's call them the Joneses, that where you had a situation. Tell us a little bit about that situation.
So the Joneses, that one of the things that uh, in that case was that that there were actually two children, and rather than being placed as infants, they were about 1 and 2 years old when they were placed. And I always tell clients, anything, there's just something that happens after the hospital where that gives fathers a toehold. But this, so they we had communications with the father, and um, he wasn't really willing to do anything. And the mother said, "Look, he doesn't do anything for me, or almost nothing. He gives me some diapers sometimes. That's about it." Um, and so um, and so the birth mother um, struggled with the decision, and in the end, she placed the child for adoption. And so he was on the birth certificate of one of the children. And under Utah law, that meant he was entitled to notice. So we said, well, we might as well give him notice of both, the adoption for both children. So we gave him the notice. Um, there was some communication with a lawyer, but Utah has a very strict statute that says if 30 days go by and you haven't complied with the law and filed a motion to intervene and shown that you have legal rights, then you are barred from asserting any rights in the child. And so we went past the 30 days. He didn't do anything. And then, and so I filed my papers, and then the judge said, um, just, he denied my motion without any comment. He just denied it and said, "Oh, he filed something now." Well, the fact that he filed something under the statute, as near as I could tell, didn't make any difference.
Generally, what were some of the challenges that you faced with that? And how long did it take? And what would be what would be some of the warnings you would give to uh, other people in connection with what might happen, and then how you were able to resolve it?
One of the things that happened early is the first family the children were placed with decided they wanted to pull out. They were not in for the fight, and so then we placed with a different family. That sent ripples through the whole thing, and gave a toehold. And the whole time the judge ruled against me. Even little tiny issues, the judge ruled against me. Um, Finally, we got to the point after it was about 4 years from the first placement until we finally got to trial. And
So these children had been with the Joneses for 4 years.
yeah, well, the Joneses for 3.5, something like that, away from biological family for the four. And so we put on our evidence, and as Donna will tell you, I did not think that we were going to win because the judge had ruled against us at every turn. When we actually got the ruling from the judge, we won on every point. He just went through every point after point after point and said that we won. This father hadn't done what he needed to do. He had provided some little bit of money, but not enough money. He'd spent some time, but not enough time. He'd done some things, but not enough things to establish parental rights, and that it was in the best interest of the children to be adopted by the Joneses. And then we just finished that up about 10 days ago. Um, and so that was a case from my point of view. I didn't have the children with me every day. That's a completely different experience than my experience. Um, the Joneses called the children by their new name for 4 years. I called them by their old name because that's what was on the papers. Um, they had kind of made the transition, incorporated the children, and I was still working at it. But this was a case that when I woke up in the middle of the night for 4 years, this this was what I was thinking about. Um, how am I going to get this? What do I need to do? How can I eventually win this case? Yeah, and so it's stressful. We had a judge in my very first contested adoption case. We had a judge say that aside from capital punishment murder cases, contested adoption cases were emotionally the most difficult for judges. I mean, we're talking about really important relationships, the family relationships. Who who gets to be the parent of this child? And there is just a lot, like all the emotions of being a human go into that.
I think, and we know that the judge struggled with it, and he wanted to do the right thing for this birth father. We know that. I think one of the things that may have changed his perspective is when he realized that the birth father was likely going back to federal prison for drug charges for the third time. And I think that maybe switched kind of the direction that he was going, trying to do the best he could for the birth father, but recognizing that it may not be the best situation for these children. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think that was a critical thing that we discovered just before the trial, um, and I figured out a way to get it in as evidence, and I think that was persuasive to the judge, important to the judge. I would love to get in the judge's head and know exactly what things were the most important to him, but I'll never have that opportunity.
So if I'm an adoptive family and I'm listening to this, I might be terrified that this type of thing might happen to me as the adoptive family. Um, what would you say to me to help me feel like it's safe to adopt?
This was an unusual situation, and by the time the Joneses became involved, it was clear where we were. Or I guess it got a little worse after them, but that it was a contested adoption and could take a while. That was clear. Um, in the 1,000, 1,100 adoptions I've done, I haven't had more than two or three at that level, that were that um, problematic. Uh, a lot of the time, my strategy is if there's a factual issue, I just try to get into court as soon as I can. 'Cause there are ways you can win things in court on the paper. File stuff, and the court will rule for you. But I I've often tried to get in on the actually get in and present evidence and see what they have, and try to resolve it more quickly. And that's been a really useful strategy because usually by the time we've assessed the situation and said this child is available for adoption, we pretty well have resolved the issues that might come up. Um, every once in a while, you have a father come out of the woodwork, but like that is way less than 1% of the time.
Now, people would say, and they have been critical of adoption in Utah, saying we don't give birth fathers as good a chance as they may have in other places.
I think that there are some states that give fathers more rights than Utah, or more automatic rights. Like Colorado gives a right to notice. If you know who he is, you need to give him notice of the adoption. and Utah says, hey, look, you don't have, unless he does something, you don't have yet. And so there, yeah, there are probably some statutes, but I think of the 50 states, um, probably 35 of them are actually more restrictive than Utah. Uh,
Explain that.
so Utah early in the development of the law, so like the late 80s, early 90s, uh, there was a development in the law that said, um, a father might, Utah can have strict rules, but if a father doesn't know that Utah is involved, then he doesn't know he has to comply with the strict rules. And so in some cases, we won't apply Utah's rules. We'll look at the place where the mother is from or where the child was conceived. And so a lot of the time we are looking at, you know, 3 states, sometimes more, and seeing if he complied with the law of any of those states. And so we sort of incorporate or import the law of other states to see if the father did anything. On the other hand, if the father knew about Utah law, then Utah law is defined to be clear. We want to know for sure whether the father's going to do anything or not, and so he's got to file a paternity action, file a notice of that paternity action with the Department of Vital Records, the paternity registry. He's got to file an affidavit saying what his plans are to take care of the child, and he has to have uh, paid money to help the mother, or at least offered to pay money for the you know pregnancy and birth of the child.
Just trying to be show that he wants to be a dad.
Yeah, and like I said, I think that in most cases, if a when a guy does those things, when a father does those things, the mother usually says, I'm going to be okay, and doesn't choose to play. So I have a lot of confidence in the mother's decision to place, telling me a lot more about the situation than just what that she wants to. Tells me a lot about the father and about her family and about her whole living situation. Um, Yeah. So if a father doesn't do those things and he knows Utah is involved, they're very strict and precise things, but they're also very easy. It's easy to file a case. It's easy to register with the paternity registry. It's just not that hard compared to being an actual father, which is really hard. Um, and really expensive over the 18 years of a child's life. And so I just don't think it's that much to ask that to begin with, he shows that he's going to be responsible. So I think Utah law actually, when it protects fathers who didn't know that Utah was involved or didn't know the child was going to be placed for adoption, I think that it's less restrictive than states that haven't developed that issue and only apply their own law, which often is as strict as Utah law.
Many people will say, "Oh, we need ethical adoptions. Adoptions need to be ethical." And I hear that word a lot. What would you define as an ethical adoption?
I think that if you asked 100 moral philosophers to define ethics, you would get 142 different definitions.
Some of them would do it multiple ways.
Yeah, and contradict themselves. The way I define morals as being a person's view of right and wrong, good versus evil, and then ethics is making decisions that involve moral decisions involving things that are right and wrong, good and evil. And in the adoption context, and in most things in life, we have duties to people. A lawyer has duty to their client. Uh, Adoption agencies have duties. Adoption agencies have duties to the state that licensed them. They have duties to the mother, to the adoptive family, um, and everyone has duties to the child. But that's really the issue: is what are the how do I do my duties to the child? The grandmother is going to say to the mother, your duty for the child is to keep the child with our family. And the mother might say, that's not actually my duty. Um, so, and I think one of the key moral features for me is choice, um, and that people have, especially the birth mother has a choice, a real choice. Um, and there's lots of ways you can define it. Dignity, liberty, um, lots of things that are similar, but that we actually care and listen and let her have all the options that ought to be available to her. And then we let her choose and support that choice. And a lot of times, a lot of the things that I hear about with ethical adoption say are people saying, "Well, she's too fragile to let her have a choice. She's too vulnerable to let her have a choice." And I think no, that's wrong. She's not too vulnerable. The problem is that there are people uh, who will take advantage of other people and try to take away their dignity and their options and say this is what you have to do. And I think that if an agency is doing that kind of thing and making a birth mother saying you don't have any choice in the matter, you have to place the child for adoption, that's bad. But it's also bad to say you can't place the child for adoption, or you can't fly after so many weeks when the airlines don't care. The airlines know better than anybody whether that's dangerous, safe or dangerous, and they don't care. Um, but I don't think that you should put someone in labor probably on a plane. Uh, on the other hand, but that's a good call for the agency and for the mother. Um, and so I think that it's critical that we have ethical adoptions. But I think the greatest ethics are that and agencies are pulled every direction, and I think rightly so. They have duties to a lot of different people, and they're sort of standing in the middle, making sure that everybody's options and dignity are protected.
Yeah. No, I appreciate that. So when you think about adoption, um, you've been doing this for a lot of years now. What changes have you seen in adoption throughout the time you've been working in it?
A few things. The one thing is that when I started, there were a lot of international adoptions. I think we're running at 10% or 8% of the number that we used to have in the early 2000s. Um, the uh, there are issues that my judges had back then that they don't seem to care about anymore.
Such
Um,
as?
like for a while, they were really worried about the affidavit of fees and expenses, and then they just didn't care anymore. And it seems to me that we've had a really significant change in the last year, like really rapidly. Since the '80s, the issue has been birth father rights. Uh, what about the biological father? What are his rights? And it seems like we've suddenly turned a corner and it's gone to birth mothers and whether they ought to be able to make their own decisions or not, and that they're somehow being exploited. My I've always had an account of these are my judges who are super protective of biological fathers, and even the ones who used to be really protective, and I'd always have a hard time, they're just not that concerned anymore. It is my feeling and my experience. On the other hand, there are other issues about like jurisdiction and why is this a Utah case? Well, for the fourth time, Your Honor, that I've explained it to you in writing, here it is. Here's why your concerns are not actual concerns, and you shouldn't even be raising them according to the Utah Supreme Court. But that's been a pretty significant change, and I mean, frankly, I'm still just getting my feet under uh, and experiencing having new things come up enough that I can anticipate what's likely to happen.
I've had the opportunity to talk with a lot of adoptees, and I've even had the chance to talk with second generation adoptees like you are. How would you think that your dad being adopted has affected you?
Uh, I mean, everything in some ways. Um, my dad was adopted at a time when you didn't always, adoption was quiet. Um, People in town wouldn't even know. Sometimes you wouldn't even tell the child they were adopted. The child would find out later they were adopted. Um, that was not the case for my dad, but it was pretty common. And because people thought, well, you're adopting from, bad blood. Obviously, there's something wrong with these people that they're coming from, and it's probably genetic that they are even having a child out of wedlock. Um, the but my dad was adopted out of a situation, and I don't know that much about situation he was adopted out of. The one thing that I know is that the birth mother's mother had died when she was young. Um, and to me, I go, oh, I get it now. Um, but he went he was raised by a stable family, religious people who, taught him right from wrong and gave him opportunities. And then he, goes off and goes to college um, and we don't know what his life would have been like the other way. But certainly he wouldn't have been where he was and wouldn't have met my mom and I wouldn't have been who I am and all those kinds of things. And it's a funny thing because I grew up not knowing anything about biological except for that, obviously they existed. Um, and they uh, uh, 15 years ago or something like that, I got a notice and found out that I could request his adoption records. And I could request him because both my parents had passed away by that point. And so I was the next person and I sent away and I we had been told the name of his mother, which was Geneva Smith, but you hear the name Smith and you go, is that a real name? Especially, that time in that context. And and so I got the papers. And one thing, this goes with the question from before, those papers are remarkably similar to what we have today. Uh, uh, Consent of the parents, statement about the father, are the home studies, are these good people? A social worker goes out and writes up a report about whether they're good people, a decree of adoption, new birth certificate. That's what it was, and that's exactly what we do now. And 100 years ago, different country, same process, same things were important. um, so I get these papers, and and honestly, the first time through, I didn't absorb all the information in the papers. But one of the documents was a birth certificate that had just crossed out the name of the mother and written in my grandparents' names. And the mother's name was Alice Geneva Smith, just like we've been told. And it gave an age, but not a birthday, and it gave a place where she was born. But my Google search showed that that place didn't exist anymore. Um, and then I go through it a couple more times. At some point, I find a paper that says the birth father is purported to be William McRoberts, and that name was completely brand new to me. And and I had this space in my head for in my brain for the name of my father's biological father. There should be a name. It exists, but I just don't know it. And I had a certain shaped hole, and that name did not fit in
It
that
didn't fit
hole
in there.
exactly.
It was supposed to be George Michael or something.
Yeah, I don't know what it was supposed to be, but like it in a way it could have been, it could be everything. Um and now it's not could be everything, it can be one name. And so but over a couple of weeks, that sort of it sort of filled in that space and fit. and then became, the actual knowledge. Um,
Did you
haven't
try
been
to
able to,
find him?
yeah, I haven't been able to. I found, I've never found anything about him. I found 3 or 4 Canadian uh, tombstones that have the name William McRoberts, but I have about the proximate birth year. But I have no reason to believe that any one of those is more likely than any other one. And maybe he didn't even stay in Canada. I don't know. On the mother, I found the mother's family in the census records, and that's how I was able to find that her mother had died. Was because she suddenly didn't appear in the census anymore. Um, and I did DNA testing, and most of my people come up on my DNA test, and I'm like, mom's cousin, who's this? Oh, that's also mom's cousin. And then I ran into somebody, and I'm like, well, I don't know about this person. I don't know. I don't know anything here. And they happened to be from Canada, and I was like, oh my gosh, I found a relative. So I send a message through the app, and I say, hey, this might come as a shock, but this is the situation, and I'd really like to know more. And this guy writes back, and he says, um, well, I don't have any information for you because I also was adopted, and I really don't want to talk to you or have any kind of a connection. So I was like, well, I guess that's the dead end of that. So I haven't connected with any actual people, but maybe someday.
I was listening to a talk the other day, and it was a man that he had he worked for Family Search, and he was talking about Roots Tech and how Root Tech is a place where people come to learn more about their families, about their roots. And he was talking about that each year it's been going on, I think, like 7 years. And the first year there were like 3,000 people, and then the next year there were like 100,000 people. They expect at Root Tech there to be 12 million people this year. And he
Including
said,
online, I imagine.
including online. Yeah, that would be an awful lot. But there are hundreds of millions of people that go on this family search in order to try to find. And you go and you ask them, why do you even care? Why do you care? And so one of the questions that's prevalent in adoption is, because a child will go from a biological family tree to an adopted family tree, how do you support and allow for and even promote there to be information from both of those family trees?
I don't I'm really glad that they have that feature on there, because I've got my what I consider my actual grandparents on there. But I'm also interested in the birth parents, and I've got them on there, and I want to keep, I want to find out about them and what their background is and where they're from, and because that's where I'm from also. And I've got this cultural past from the adoptive side, but I also have a biological genetic past, that's part of me, and I think both are important. Both are important to me. Um, I think that it's common in adoption for kids who are adopted. A lot of the time, they're maybe 12, 13 years old to become really interested in their birth family. And so that freaks out some adoptive parents. But it's actually a safe, important, good thing. They just want to know the story of themselves. And I think we're all entitled to know the story of ourselves to the best that we possibly can. Um, we learn stuff about ourselves our entire lives, about our psychology and everything. And these external things I think are just as important. And both families, there's something going on with both things, and they're both important.
A friend of mine used to say, the world outside, though vast and wide, is small compared to that inside. I've pondered how this thing could be that I should have to study me. And I think we spend our whole lives studying me. And that's especially true with adoptees, as they study who they are. I, I would guess that one of the changes that you've seen, and certainly one of the changes that I've seen, is the greater openness in adoption. That adoptions are becoming not just willing to be more open, but we're seeing the value in them being more open. We're
Yeah.
also seeing, of course, the challenges that come with being more open. What are your thoughts on that?
Uh, well, yeah, and there can be challenges, and everybody's bringing their own particular psychology. And I'll tell you, when I have clients call, I have some clients who are uh, really flexible, easygoing people, and everything's good. And I'm not going to hear from them until I contact them because we're ready to finalize. And then I have some other people who are really quite high strung and really feel a need to actively be making moving something forward. And the problem in my case is there's really nothing for them to do that's helpful, but they need to feel that that's just part of their personality. And I think you've got some of the same things. I recently had a woman that I had worked with for a little bit contacted me, and she was just getting ready to retire. And in the context of getting ready to retire, she found out that she was adopted. For the first time, she learned that. She had no idea. And so she has I've helped her work um, on tracking down what information we can get about the adoption and about her biological parents. And then she's, talked to people and trying to find out the story of herself. Um, and some of the people in her family, that's caused them to be anxious. What? You want to get rid of us and go to your birth family? And she's like, no, you guys are really good people. And these I got adopted out of a situation that's pretty crazy. And there's a lot of there's a lot of crime and police reports that have given her information and a lot of stuff going on. This is like the 50s that all this is happening. And and there's really no risk to her biological family. At the same time, there could be, or there's no risk to either side in that situation. But sometimes you have um, somebody, one side or the other, birth parents side or adoptive parents side, who don't deal with things very well. And it's not have doesn't have anything to do with the adoption necessarily, it just has to do with how they interact with other people and whether they can manage to do that in a positive way and how they deal with the emotions, because there are definitely strong emotions involved in the whole thing. And some birth mothers are looking for reasons to think that this family's not really taking care of their child, and you can always see something that you might criticize because you might have done different. Doesn't mean it's right, but you can find that. And so there might be some issues. But I think by and large, the more people that love somebody, the more people that person can say, I got so many people that care about me, including my adoptive family and my birth family and my extended family. And I got all these friends. Like the more people you have like that, the more stable and the better off you are, I think.
No, I think so too. So, is that what gives you hope when you think about the future of adoption? What gives you hope?
I think that um, in this crazy, imperfect world, adoption is a way to make things a little more perfect. And there are people who, for whatever reason, can't have a child, maybe, or they just choose to adopt or something like that. And then you have mothers who say, I just don't know how I'm going to make this work. And that comes together for the benefit of all three. The child is benefited, the adoptive family is benefited, the birth family is benefited. Everybody's better off because of this thing. And why, in the long run, why wouldn't we want that? Why who's going to be against that? It needs to be that they actually choose it, and we need to make sure that that always is protected. But if when they choose it and they say this is the best thing for me, then it'll facilitate it, and we'll get there. Um, yeah, I just think it's a beautiful thing when you look at it at a societal level. It's something that we want to have happen. Sometimes people have, it's no fault of their own. Sometimes parents die, um, or something like that. And just to have a system in place that allows children to be raised in the best safe and protective environment that their parents can provide is a good thing.
So, in the times that you've been doing adoption, there have been some tough stuff. I know I've gone through with some of you with on some of this tough stuff.
Yeah.
Um, what's something that keeps you in it? Is it what you've just said? What keeps you in some of this tough stuff adoption?
There are so many successes that even when it's tough and even when I'm not sure I'm going to be able to win, um, there are so many times that people are so appreciative. Even the judges love to do an adoption as long as it's an uncontested adoption. They love doing it. They always say, "This is the best part of my day." I had a finalization just before we started this, and the judge said, "What a great way to finish out my day." Um, and so everybody loves adoption. And I'm part of the we got to make sure it works for everybody. We got to make sure that people are giving valid voluntary consents to things. We got to make sure the people who are adopting are good people. All those kinds of things. But once that's done, it's just great. It just blesses people's lives and makes the whole world better. And so I'm just excited all the time. I can't even imagine not doing it, because it's such a rewarding part of what I do with my life. It's the contested stuff is hard, but so is a contested, you know, trust or a contested probate action because someone has passed away. Um, and those things that even when I win, it's not as positive as a good adoption.
Hmm. And so, in kind of in conclusion, for anyone watching this podcast, if they're an adoptive family, what advice would you give? If they're a birth mother, what advice would you give? And if they're an adoptee, or even a second generation adoptee like you, what advice would you give?
I'm not always a big guy on giving absolute advice in every situation. As a lawyer, that's my job, but then I take all I tailor it to the specific situation. Um, to birth mothers, I would say understand how much you're honored and revered in the thing that you do. We used to have a judge, and he every adoption he would say, "Now I just want to take a minute and honor the birth mother and the courage and love that it took for her to do what she did. And I just want to take a minute and mention that." And I always loved that. Um, and to to adoptive families, um, I don't know, all my adoptive families have, 99% of them are just fantastic people, just the best people you could possibly meet, and interact with. And it's hard, and it can be hard to get a placement. Lots of times, what brought them to this point has been difficult, um, and and I don't have a whole lot to do with the actual placement ever. Um, but we care about you, and you're going to be great parents. And and things are going to be lovely. Second generation people, I think for a lot of us, it's just a fact of our lives that we understand. And so just enjoy the ride. Enjoy finding out. When I first started looking into things, you think, I hope it's like, royalty or nobility or something like that. And it's
Maybe there's a
not.
will.
Yeah, maybe there's a will. And then you think, well, if not that, at least like a general or an admiral or something like that. And it's probably not. My people are dirt farmers a long way back. And that's just what they are. Uh, I don't have, my wife has some colorful people in her past. There's like this story involving a murder and a horse, and I don't remember the whole story, but those things, I love those crazy stories about ancestors where they weren't perfect. Um, and you come from an adoption situation. It wasn't perfect, but my life's not perfect, and no one's life is actually perfect, no matter how hard we work to put best spin on it. Um, we're all just muddling along and trying to do the best we can.
I back to a story I heard from somebody. They did a study, and they tried to look at what effect knowing your genetic or biological history, or either history, either from an adopted or from a biological point of view, knowing that history, what effect it had on children. And what do you think the effect was?
I don't know. I imagine it's a positive effect, though.
It made them more resilient. Those kids that understood the stories about grandpa, or how Uncle Clay made it across the wilderness, or even great grandma, all that she went through. When children know the stories, whether they were your biological or your adoptive families, they can relate to them and think, they went through that, they handled that, I can do it too. And so knowing both lines can be a very positive effect for children.
Yeah.
Um, Lon, this has been wonderful. We thank you for being on here. I thank you. I thank you not just for being here, but for being my friend. You have been my friend for many years, my confidant, my advocate in so many ways. And if there's anything that others may need in the realm of adoption, Lon's a good man to go to to try to get help and support. Any final words for you?
Nope. I certainly have appreciated all that we've done and all the times that we've sat around the campfire and chatted about things, but also the times we've ran into battle with swords drawn together. Uh, and
Sometimes
we've
one,
had each
sometimes
other's
lost.
backs for a long time, and we know that we can trust and rely on each other.
Thank you for all for joining us. Thank you for joining us for this episode of Adoption Utah. I'm Donna Pope. Please visit adoptionutah.org to sign up for our newsletter and find caring experts who can help you with your adoption journey.